Earlier last week, the Constitutional Court here began hearing a case that alleges the Korean government has violated the right to a healthy environment by taking little climate action. So what is the relevance of Korea's climate lawsuit? Why are climate lawsuits spreading across the globe? And do these lawsuits bring about climate action? Hope your work week is off to a good start. You're watching Monday's edition of Issues and Insiders. I'm Min Sunhee. Today we touch upon Korea's first youth climate lawsuit, whose hearing began earlier last week. For this, I have Lucy Maxwell, co-director of Climate Litigation Network. Lucy, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
I also have Professor Chung Suh-yong at Korea University, a renowned scholar in the political economy of climate change, if I may. Professor Chung, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Hello, how are you?
Fine, thank you, Professor. Professor, then, for the sake of our viewers overseas, could you tell us a bit about the details with regard to Korea's own litigation, which I understand is Asia's first case of youth climate lawsuit, that is?
Yes, actually, as you may not know, that Korea, Asian countries in general, are not that litigious enough to raise the cases through the lawsuits. In the sense that it's a very fascinating to see that we have now the lawsuit to deal with the climate change issues, and here, very interesting, important factor is that it has been led by the youth group. There was a youth advocacy group called Youth for Climate Action. They filed a case against the government in year 2020 based on the ground that the government has not done enough to tackle climate change. And the similar lawsuits filed in the Constitutional Court, three others. So Constitutional Court decided to combine all of them and finally decide to have a public hearing at this time. And then, as I mentioned, it's a first case led by a youth group in Asia.
Right, and Professor Chung, what would you say is the relevance of this particular case being filed in the country's Constitutional Court?
Well, Constitutional Court can deal with cases based on the different categories. And then one of them is in a case where individuals has been, breached by any action of the government and others about their constitutional right. Here, this group argued that because of the lack of or inadequate actions of the government to tackle climate change, their constitutional right to the right to happiness and the right to healthy environment have been breached. So therefore, they decided to bring this case through the Constitutional Court. And then also in the Korean context, Constitutional Court has been regarded as a relatively more neutral than any other court system. I'm not sure whether it is really true, but we have that image in the Korean society. I think this group also thought that this would be sort of the good help for them to bring this case through Constitutional Court this time.
Right. Now, Lucy, Korea's lawsuit follows a landmark ruling, I believe, by the European Court of Human Rights earlier this month, in which it found the Swiss government had infringed upon the rights of its elderly by failing to phase out fossil fuels. Now, again, but this time for our viewers here in Korea, could you tell us a bit about this particular case and its ruling?
Yeah, absolutely. So this case was brought by more than 2,000 senior Swiss women who were represented by an organisation and then several individual senior Swiss women who alleged that the Swiss government's climate action was not robust enough. It wasn't in line with science and it wouldn't contribute to the global task of preventing further dangerous climate change because the targets simply weren't strong enough. And this had the effect then, the women argued, that their rights to life and to private and family life, which includes health and being able to live autonomously, were being affected by the climate change impacts already felt in Switzerland and would be more affected because we know that the climate impacts are going to get worse. And the highest human rights court in Europe agreed with their claim. The European Court of Human Rights found that Switzerland's climate action, and specifically its actions before 2030 and its target for 2030, weren't in line with best available science. There wasn't a clear and robust legal framework that set the government on track to meet its target. And in fact, Switzerland hadn't met its own targets, and that these failings amounted to a failure by the government to protect the rights of people within its country, and specifically the senior Swiss women who brought the case. And so the court ordered Switzerland to go back and revise its climate action plans.
Right. Lucy, pundits, they claim that these climate lawsuits are rising across the globe. Do you agree? And if you do, what do you believe is perhaps fueling this particular trend?
Yes, absolutely. We know that this is a global movement, and there's now more than 2,000 climate cases that have been filed around the world against governments, against companies, by a whole wide range of groups who are concerned about the lack of action by our elected representatives and by major polluters. And what's fueling this is just deep despair that despite decades of pledges, particularly by our governments at the international level, to take strong climate action, they've continued to fail to do so. And communities can see what our climate scientists are saying, which is that there's a very narrow and rapidly closing window of action this decade to prevent or to protect a livable future for us all, and that governments' pledges, which are regularly reviewed by UN environmental bodies, continue to fall short of what is needed to prevent that dangerous future. And communities are deeply concerned after many other attempts to negotiate, to pressure, to ask their elected representatives to take action. They do turn to the courts, and that's what we see in many countries around the world, and obviously in Korea now.
Right. And the case here in Korea, Professor Chung, against the government claims that the government itself has not been doing enough to fight its carbon footprints. That being said, Professor Chung, what can you tell us about Korea's efforts to ease its greenhouse gas emissions? And do you believe that more can be done?
Well, if you would ask the same question to every government will say we are doing our best. So that's for sure. And I don't understand they are doing their own best. But here, the question is there any way where we can elevate the further efforts done by the government in a different way or in addition to what they have been doing? In that sense, as you may know, that the Korean government introduced the basic climate change plan, and that they committed a very ambitious plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40%. They, introduced the Presidential Committee on the Green Growth, Carbon Neutrality Green Growth Committee, and others. So it seems like government is really doing good enough. The question here is that is there any good coordination done inside the government? So in other words, there are different ministries and then different commissions involved. And then unless we have a better coordination to tackle climate change, it's going to be very difficult to achieve all the targets that government itself set by themselves. So here, I think that at the president level, that's the highest level of the government in Republic of Korea. President himself, President Min Sunhee, needs to take up this agenda in his own hand and then have a very close look at on the daily basis instead of encouraging the other ministries or commissions to take care of these issues. This issue of the coordination at the highest level is something that government must introduce further in addition to what they've been doing so far.
Right. And in the meantime then, Lucy, what are your thoughts regarding the relevance of such climate lawsuits and perhaps triggering climate action on a broader scale?
Right. So we have about a decade now of experience of seeing what happens when communities bring a climate lawsuit against their governments. And we see a wide range of impacts of such a lawsuit, including direct action by governments to increase their efforts to combat climate change as a result of lawsuits. two strong examples come from rulings in Europe. In the Netherlands, the Dutch government lost its climate case. It was ordered to increase its efforts to reduce emissions by 2020. And what we saw was immediate action from the first court order that was made. And that action included a new Climate Change Act, taps on coal-fired power production, and huge multi-billion euro investment in the clean energy transition. So huge investment in renewable energy and energy efficiency. And what that meant was that the Dutch government did achieve the order set by the court by 2020. In Germany, what we saw was, again, following the government losing its climate case, within 2 weeks of the order of the highest court in Germany, Germany increased its 2030 target and brought forward by 5 years its net zero target. So this is immediate and very strong action by governments following court orders. But we also know that climate lawsuits have a huge impact in terms of the public's awareness of the climate crisis, of their government's commitments and promises to take action, and of the scientific evidence that shows that those commitments are not being met and are frankly often just not good enough. So these lawsuits have a wide variety of impacts in and outside of the courtroom.
Right, that is good to know. Professor Chung, in a previous publication, you touched upon the need for Korea to better reflect climate change considerations into official development assistance initiatives. Would you like to take this opportunity, Professor Chung, to share your thoughts with us?
By the way, I was very impressed by the Arirang TV's finding out of my publication, though.
I follow you.
So thank you very much for that. Let me just introduce what we have found through this academic work. So Korea, as a new donor country, actually, among the donor countries in the world, actually has a little efforts to put emphasis on the climate change issues, surprisingly. There are several issues, probably. One of them will be that the climate change issue has not been well integrated into the ODA policy development process in Korea in general somehow, and surprisingly. Number two, already existing the climate change projects that have been put in place some years, actually they have been focusing on adaptation. In the world in general, among the donor countries, actually mitigation has been placed too much emphasis on. So therefore, there is general discussions about the balancing mitigation and adaptation. But here in Korea, the other way goes around. So Korean government needs to focus on the mitigation-focused climate change ODA a lot more than before, and also having balanced approach and then mainstreaming climate policy into the ODA policy. So President Yoon consistently emphasized the importance of green ODA by Republic of Korea. In this context, that we were suggesting that climate change issues needs to really mainstream in the ODA process by focusing on the mitigation a little bit more, so that in the end, we can have a balanced approach of mitigation, adaptation, working together with developing countries.
Right, for a more tangible advancement into a green world then. Lucy, with regard to the case here in South Korea, what would be the broader implications, do you suppose, of a ruling in favor of the plaintiffs?
The Korean climate cases are of regional and global significance. We know that they're the first of their kind in East Asia. That is, they're the first legal challenge by communities to a government's weak climate action because it's not based on science and it therefore doesn't protect their rights. That's the first of that kind of lawsuit in East Asia. And if the highest court in South Korea upholds the challenge that the communities have brought, this would be a hugely important ruling for, obviously, the Korean government, but for governments in the region, because it would send a very clear message that climate action is a legal duty, that climate action needs to be based on science in order to protect people's human rights, and that courts will scrutinise what governments are doing because there's so much at stake. And such a ruling would be the first of its kind outside the EU. There have been numerous courts in Europe that have made such a finding, and now we have the European Court of Human Rights finding. But a ruling from the Korean Constitutional Court would be hugely significant because of its status as the highest court in Korea and because of the region in which this case is taking place. So a ruling would have a ripple effect through many other similar cases that are happening around the world. There's a group of about 100 similar cases, and 40 of those are pending before courts. And many courts would be looking to the ruling that the Korean court would give in this case.
Right, and keeping that in mind, Professor Chung, I understand this might be a tough question, but what are your prospects with regard to a favorable ruling in support of the plaintiffs here in Korea?
Well, this should be the most difficult question that I've been ever asked by the Arirang TV so far. So it's I don't know, but I think that there might be some possibility for the Constitutional Court to consider this case in favor for the plaintiffs. Simply because it has been very rare. It's the first youth-led, by the way, climate change lawsuit, and where the Constitutional Court finally arranged a hearing, right, in the public. That's very significant. And considering cautiously enough the current composition of the judges within the Constitutional Court, well, it's a balance between the liberals and the conservatives. But I would say there is a little bit of the liberal flavor going on inside the composition of the Constitutional Court's judges. Well, of course, it doesn't necessarily mean that the Constitutional Court can decide on cases not based on the legal ground, but based on political ground. No, but I would say that, I would give a little bit of positive sign to see the possibility that Constitutional Court might consider this case in favor for the plaintiffs. I think that's what Lucy is indicated that they will surely bring the more positive signs to the government, way of encouraging them to tackle climate change in more aggressive way, I would say.
Right. And in the meantime, then, Lucy, generally speaking, what do you propose to promote greater action against climate change?
Yes, greater climate action primarily needs to be taken by our elected representatives. I think anyone bringing a climate case has that message. The climate crisis will not be solved through lawsuits. They're an important instrument, but ultimately the duty to protect us and the duty to take climate action is on our elected representatives. And that's what everyone bringing a lawsuit wants to see. They want to see much greater investment in renewable energy, in energy efficiency. They want to see fossil fuel subsidies being stopped, no more expansion of new fossil fuel projects. The science is very clear on that. And people want to see a just transition. They know that there are opportunities, but also that everyone needs to be brought together for this transition and that jobs need to be shared, costs need to be shared if we're all going to benefit and prosper in this much more livable and sustainable future. So that's the kind of climate action we want to see by those who we've elected to protect us and represent us.
Right, of course. And Professor Chung, you've been very vocal about the efforts that the government can make. That being said, what are your suggestions with regard to tackling climate change for the ordinary members of the public? Very briefly speaking.
Well, right. So one of the significance of talking about this youth-led lawsuit now is that next generation doesn't have a right to vote to discuss about climate change impact for their own. So in the sense that future generation needs to participate in the general discussions on the climate change issues more than before, for sure. At the same time, I would say maybe I might be biased a little bit because I'm a university professor, but another important responsibility of themselves to pursue is to train themselves to have more expertise, more understanding on the details of scientific policy-related issues of the climate change issues. And ordinary citizens as well, we understand that, okay, there is impact of the climate change in our daily life. We understand that. I do hope that in addition to that, ordinary citizens also needs to know more about what are the significant scientific and the policy aspects of the climate change issues. And then Korea needs to develop our customized climate change reactions by ordinary citizens and the young people as well. So we need to get together, discuss about, climate change issues in a more, open way. So I think these are some of the things that ordinary citizens and the young generation needs to do more.
Right, essentially to take a greater interest in the topic then. Professor Chung, as always, thank you so much for your insights. And Lucy, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, on that note, we end Monday's edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching and be sure to join us again same time tomorrow.